Percival Everett's novel James is a bold and thought-provoking reimagining of the adventures of Huckleberry Finn, but this time told from the perspective of Jim, the enslaved man who accompanies Huck on his journey down the Mississippi River. By shifting the narrative focus, Everett gives Jim a powerful and intelligent voice, one that was largely absent in Mark Twain's original novel, a new perspective on a classic story. In James, Percival Everett takes one of the most well-known American novels, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and flips the perspective entirely. Instead of following the journey through the eyes of young Huck, we now see everything from Jim's point of view. Jim, the enslaved man who was once just a supporting character in Mark Twain's novel, is now the heart and soul of the story. But this is not just a simple retelling. Everett does something revolutionary. He gives Jim the voice he was denied in the original text. In Twain's novel, Jim is often seen through Huck's limited understanding. He appears superstitious, sometimes foolish, and mostly passive. However, in James, we learn that Jim is anything but simple. He is highly intelligent, thoughtful, and deeply aware of the dangers around him. One of the most striking aspects of this shift in perspective is how Jim perceives Huck and the world they inhabit. While Huck sees their adventure as a grand escape filled with freedom and excitement, Jim understands that his very life is at stake at every moment. He is constantly thinking ahead, strategizing, and masking his true thoughts and abilities to survive in a society that refuses to acknowledge his full humanity. Everett also reclaims Jim's intellect in a powerful way. In James, Jim speaks multiple languages, thinks critically about the world, and engages in deep philosophical reflection. He is not just a man running from slavery. He is a man trying to reclaim his dignity, his identity, and his future. His interactions with Huck take on new meaning, as we see how much he protects and guides the boy, even while knowing that Huck's privilege as a white child gives him choices Jim himself will never have. By making Jim the narrator, Everett forces us to re-examine not just Twain's novel, but the way history itself has been told. Who gets to tell the story? How does perspective shape truth? And most importantly, what other voices have been silenced in the narratives we accept as classics? A question to consider. If Jim has always been this intelligent, resourceful, and aware, why was his voice left out of Huckleberry Finn in the first place? And what does that omission tell us about the stories we've been taught to believe? A story of survival and resistance. In James, Jim's journey is not just about escaping slavery. It is about navigating a world designed to erase him. Unlike the carefree adventure Huck imagines their trip down the Mississippi River to be, for Jim, every moment is a battle for survival. He must outthink, outmaneuver, and outlast a system that views him as property rather than a man. Everett's portrayal of Jim is deeply layered. He is not merely a desperate fugitive, but a strategist who understands the dangers he faces far better than Huck ever could. He knows that a single wrong step could mean capture, torture, or even death. Unlike Huck, who can move freely as a white child, Jim must carefully decide when to speak and when to remain silent, when to show knowledge and when to feign ignorance. Throughout the novel, Jim's intelligence is his greatest weapon. He reads people with precision, understanding the hypocrisy of so-called civilized society. He knows that many of the white men he encounters see themselves as good Christians while still profiting from the enslavement of black people. He watches as they twist morality to justify cruelty, and he learns to manipulate their expectations to his advantage. Jim's survival is not just physical. It is intellectual and emotional. He resists in ways both subtle and bold. When he plays dumb to deceive those who underestimate him, that is resistance. When he protects Huck, even knowing Huck's privilege might one day betray him, that is resistance. When he dares to dream of freedom despite everything telling him he cannot have it, that is resistance. This deeper look into Jim's experience forces readers to ask difficult questions about the past and present. We see the true horror of slavery, not just the physical brutality, but the psychological warfare that forces a man to hide his intelligence, his emotions, and even his own dreams in order to survive. A question to consider. If Jim is so intelligent and resourceful, how many other enslaved people were just as brilliant, but never had the chance to tell their stories? And what might history look like if their voices had been heard? Literary and social commentary. One of the most powerful aspects of James is how Percival Everett challenges the way stories are told and who gets to tell them. By rewriting the adventures of Huckleberry Finn from Jim's perspective, Everett forces us to confront a difficult truth. Literature has long been shaped by those in power, often at the expense of silenced voices. Mark Twain's original novel is considered a classic of American literature, praised for its critique of racism and its use of vernacular language to capture the time period. However, despite its progressive elements, Huckleberry Finn still tells the story from the perspective of a white boy. Jim, the enslaved man at the heart of the novel's moral dilemma, is rarely given the depth or agency he deserves. Twain's Jim is kind, loyal, and even wise in moments, but he is also portrayed as superstitious and somewhat naive. His intelligence and inner thoughts remain largely hidden. Everett James exposes this imbalance. By letting Jim tell his own story, the novel critiques how history and literature have often misrepresented black voices. It asks us to reconsider how we view classics, and whether they truly represent the full truth of the past. Jim, in Everett's version, is not a side character in Huck's adventure. He is the story itself. He is not merely an enslaved man hoping for freedom. He is a thinker, a survivor, and a man who sees the world more clearly than most around him. Beyond just literature, James also serves as a social commentary on how narratives shape power. The way stories are told influences how society remembers history. If Jim's perspective had been included from the beginning, how differently would people understand slavery? How might American literature and even American culture have evolved if more stories had been told from the viewpoints of the oppressed rather than the privileged? Everett's novel reminds us that literature is not neutral. The stories we celebrate and the voices we prioritize reflect deeper truths about society. And when we go back and re-examine those narratives, we gain a clearer picture of the past and a better understanding of the present. A question to consider. If literature has shaped how we understand history, what other classic stories might look different if told from perspectives of those who were ignored? And what does that mean for the way we read and interpret books today? Why James matters today. Percival Everett James is not just a novel about the past. It is a book that speaks directly to the present. By retelling the story of Huckleberry Finn from Jim's perspective, Everett forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about history, race, and storytelling. But beyond its literary brilliance, James serves as a powerful reminder how the past still shapes the world we live in today. The power of reclaiming voices. For centuries, history and literature have been written primarily by those in power. The voices of the oppressed, the enslaved, and the marginalized have often been ignored or distorted. James corrects this by giving Jim not just a voice, but fully realized identity, one that was denied him in Twain's original novel. This act of reclamation is more than just a literary choice. It is a statement about justice. It reminds us that we must always question whose stories have been told and whose have been left out. The relevance of Jim's struggle today. Though James is set in the 19th century, the themes it explores, racism, power, freedom, and resistance, are just as relevant in the 21st century. The book challenges readers to consider how society continues to silence or misrepresent certain voices. Even today, discussions about race, history, and justice are often shaped by those who hold privilege, while those who have lived through oppression struggle to have their experiences acknowledged. Jim's journey is a story of survival, intelligence, and resistance against a world that refuses to see his humanity. This struggle continues today, whether in the fight for racial justice, equal rights, or fair representation in politics, media, and education. James encourages readers to recognize these patterns and to actively seek out and uplift voices that have been historically ignored, lessons we can apply to our lives. Everett James is more than just a novel. It is a call to action. Here are a few ways we can take its lessons and apply them in our own lives. 1. Question the stories you've been told. Just because something is a classic doesn't mean it tells the full truth. Always ask, whose perspective is missing? 2. Listen to marginalized voices, whether in literature, media, or daily life. Make an effort to hear and amplify the voices of those who have been historically silenced. 3. Educate yourself on history beyond the mainstream narrative. Read books, watch documentaries, and engage with sources that provide a fuller, more accurate picture of the past. 4. Speak up against injustice. Jim survived by using his intelligence to navigate an unfair world. Today, we can use our voices, actions, and choices to challenge injustice wherever we see it. 5. Value the power of storytelling. Stories shape the way we see the world. Be conscious of the narratives you consume and the ones you share with others. Final thought. A question to carry forward. If Jim had been allowed to tell his own story from the beginning, how differently might we understand American history today? And what can we do to make sure that the voices of the past and the present are finally heard?